4,
Recording
3,
in
2,
progress.
1, 0.
Good
Good
evening.
evening, everyone. Good evening, good evening.
We're about to start the meeting of the Board of Directors of the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District. It's June 20th, 2022. Let's call the roll, please.
Thank you. Director Roberson,
I am here.
Director Anderson,
Yes.
Director Mallet,
Yep.
Director Riley,
Here.
Director Edwards,
Here.
Vice Chair Adams,
Here.
Chair Paul.
Here.
All directors are present.
Thank you. Before we recite the Pledge of Allegiance, I just want to note that today is Juneteenth. Actually, today is the federal holiday for Juneteenth. Juneteenth was yesterday. And I'm sure everybody, or almost everybody listening knows, but that is now a federal holiday to commemorate when the enslaved people in Texas were told that slavery had been abolished 2 years earlier. And they were, I guess we weren't thinking about Juneteenth when we made the schedule for our board meetings, but next time around, we will. Okay, let's recite the Pledge of Allegiance now.
I pledge allegiance to the
To the
flag
flag
of the
of the United
United States of
States of
America
America
and
and
to the republic for which we stand, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
For all. Thank you. Are there any additions or corrections to the agenda?
Yes, there are. You should have received a sheet of those, but Joelle, would you please identify the 4 changes? Or do you want me to?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and read the additions and corrections. So under the consent calendar, the staff note, under the recommendation, it states that the resolution number is resolution number 2022-18. That should be stricken out, and number 17 should be inserted. Under action items, the agenda title.
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
let me just stop you for a second. Which
Yeah.
consent calendar item?
Item number 4.
yeah, item number 4. So if you look at the staff
Yes.
note
Thank you.
under recommendation, resolution number 2022-18, the 18 is incorrect, so that should be stricken out.
Okay.
The number should be 17, and that's consistent with the title up at the top, and then also Exhibit 4A.
Mhm.
Now, under action items, the title that's listed on the agenda is incorrect. So the entire title should be stricken out.
Which item number are we talking about?
That would be item number 33.
Thank you.
Yes. So the current language that's listed on the agenda is review proposed fiscal year 2022-2023 MPWMD budget and resolution 2022-14. That should be stricken out. And the language that should be inserted there is consider adoption of proposed FY 2022-23 MPWMD budget and resolution number 2022-14.
Okay.
And then
if you can just summarize the next one. It's just the name of the actual staff note is changed consistently when you actually get to the item.
Okay.
Okay. And then for item number 34, Exhibit 34F, the last section the last sentence in section 1 is missing the word percent, and that should have been spelled out. So for clarity, it should have read no more than 15%, and the rest of the language is okay. And then when we get to that, if you have further questions, we could clarify it further.
Okay,
And those are all the additions and corrections for tonight's agenda.
thank you. Maybe when we get to those items, we can just quickly repeat the correction.
Yeah, please. Good
Okay.
idea.
So let's see if the public has anything, any member of the public wants to address the board at this time. You want to, Joelle, can
Yeah.
you?
I'll go ahead and do that. So if you would like to make public comment on today's agenda for items not listed, or any items that are listed on the consent calendar, informational items, you may do so only during this time. And you could do that by raising your hand, or if you're calling in, push *9. And Chair Paul, I do not see anybody with their hands raised, so I return this back to the board.
And Joelle, would you move Thomas Christensen over from attendees to panelists?
Got it.
Thanks.
Okay, let's move on to the consent calendar. I believe Director Riley, you wanted to pull one item from the consent calendar?
Yes, I'd like to pull item 16 for an informational question.
Okay.
We thought you wanted to pull it to actually explain it to everyone.
That would be my question. Can you explain it to everyone?
We gave you the primer earlier today. We thought we'd have you do it.
No, I saw it, but I thought it was worth public comment.
Yeah.
Or public, attention.
I approve of the request to have this explained. I think that's good. Any other requests to pull any items from the consent calendar? Okay, then, is there a motion to adopt all of the items on this long list, the consent calendar? I just want to note that the administrative committee with staff went over most of these things scrupulously at length at their committee meeting.
I make a motion to approve with the changes that were or corrections that were made.
You can watch TV on mute if you want.
I'll second this motion.
And that is, just to be clear, this is with the exception of item 16, correct?
Yep.
Okay. So let's vote on that motion.
Director Mallett,
Yes.
Director Roberson,
Yes.
Director Riley,
Aye.
Director Edwards,
Yes.
Director Anderson,
Yes.
Vice Chair Adams,
Aye.
Chair Paul.
Yes.
The motion carries on a vote of 7-0.
And I guess now we'll address number 16 and
Where is item 16?
Item 16 was a little bit of a mystery to me, and then in my back channel or whatever it was called, question about it, it was explained to me, and it's related to Prop 13 from a long time ago, and that's still a pariah to public agencies in general, Prop 13. And it's still in existence, and it still carries weight in many, many, many jurisdictions throughout California. And I just thought it was interesting to, first of all, be informed, be reminded of this, because I was once informed and then I forgot. So, but I just wonder if Dave or Suresh, if you can just give a very short explanation of why we do this. And that's all I'm looking for.
You're just a troublemaker.
You gotta have fun in every group.
Good evening, directors, chair. So basically, the appropriation, or sometimes it's also referred to as the gain limit, the initiative was passed back in '79, and the main gist of that was so that there could be limitation on the expenditures for state and local government agencies. And so basically, the way it's articulated in the actual in the actual Constitution is basically how to calculate the limit. And so when we go to calculate the limit, it basically places a limit in terms of how your expenditure should be from year to year, and it's just not basically a free pass, so that the limitation can be placed on the expenditures for the organization, that you can't just have the property tax can be used for whatever you can or whatever you want to use it, or however you want to increase it. It can only be increased by a certain threshold, a limit. There is an exception in the calculation, and the exception is basically when you do a direct expenditure for capital projects, that can be excluded from the calculation. And when you look at the calculation that I attached to the actual resolution as an exhibit, it shows that what the exception limits are, and so the exceptions gets calculated in there as well. So it basically says that you can't, let's say if your property tax goes from, let's say, $2 million to $3 million, and that's going to be a no-no because the appropriation limit will not allow you to use those expenditures. You basically have 2 years to then refund those back to the county, and the county gets it back to the ratepayers. So that's what the appropriation limit is in simple terms, is that it just limits or places a limit on the expenditure for each year.
I just,
The refund, I'm sorry, go ahead, Director Riley.
no, go ahead, because I just have a comment. not a
Oh,
question.
yes, a question for Suresh. Did you mean refunded to the taxpayers?
To the taxpayers, correct.
Yeah, okay.
Because I noticed Tom Raleigh is in the audience. And, part of the reasons why I asked this kind of question about the tax limitations and the structure of limits that exist around it. It's partly to remind people that, these limits exist. We still honor them, and that we still pay attention to, what our flexibility is around financing. And it's not for Tom Raleigh's purpose that I'm raising this, but I do know that he's often in our audience, and that just reminds me often that pay attention. And so that's what I'm trying to pay attention to. Anyway, thank you for the explanation. I have nothing more to add. And if no one else does, I would move approval of item 16.
I'll second, or Mary can second it. I have a question because, excuse me, and that is, the state has a gigantic surplus. And under the GAN initiative, I think part of the requirements will be to refund to the taxpayers. Now, as we know, a big part of the taxes that are paid in California are by the top 5 or 10%, and much of it's capital gains tax. So my question is, do they figure out each taxpayer who paid, or is there a general rebate to everyone who filed a state income tax form? How do they figure out if they do have to give money back? How do they figure out which taxpayers received that money? Were they the ones that actually paid it?
Yeah, so this,
answer to that.
Director Robertson, this only applies to the property tax side of it.
Right.
This is not for the income tax. And
Got it.
my guess is if it's ever refunded, then it'll basically be applied proportionately as to how people pay their property taxes. I won't be able to say exactly how the county does it, but my guess would be that that's how the county would probably apply the refund. Is the proportion goes to the same individuals that paid the taxes.
That would make sense. Thank you, Suresh, for clarifying that. You're right. It's property taxes versus general income taxes here too. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay,
Did we go out to the public on this one? Our friend Tom Riley might want to weigh in.
let's do that now.
Yes, so if you would like to make public comment on item number 16, please raise your hand. Sarah, you have the timer ready? And at this time, I would like to invite Tom Rowley. Tom, when you're ready, please present your comment.
Let me unmute very quickly. Good evening. just want to say that it's glad that we still have the protections of Prop 13, limited as it is. And I think it was a good question from Mayor Roberson on the limits. So anyway, it's good to see that you're following what the rules require as far as the GAN limit. So I know your treasurer, Sharad Paresh, is right on top of it. So keep up the good work, complying with the law. Thank you. And the Constitution.
Thank you, Mr. Rowley. Are there any other members of the public that wish to speak?
Chair Paul, I see no raised hands.
Thank you. Then let's have a roll call vote, please.
Chair Paul, do you want to officially close public comment or? Okay, never mind. I apologize. Sarah, could you share the timer? Michael Bear would like to make public comment on item number 16. Michael, when you're ready, please present your comment.
Everybody, happy summertime, solstice, right? The longest day of the year. So here we are working away. I just wanted to say, I've been following this for a long time, and this is either the first or second time that I can honestly say I agree with Tom Raleigh 100%. Thank you.
That's it?
That's it.
Meeting adjourned.
All right, thanks to both of you. Any other members of the public wish to speak?
Chair Paul, I see no raised hands.
Thank you. All right, let's close public comment now and take a roll call vote, please.
Director Roberson,
Yes.
Director Anderson,
Yes.
Director Riley,
Aye.
Director Edwards,
Yes.
Director Malik,
Yes.
Vice Chair Adams,
Aye.
Chair Paul.
Yes,
The motion passes on a vote of 7-0.
thank you. And thank you for raising those questions, Director Riley. And now, General Manager, over to you.
Thank you. I will try to be brief because it's a very lengthy agenda, but there are a few highlights in the compliance report. Compliance for the cease and desist order and the CSAT adjudication. With that, Joelle, if you'd share screen and run the, there we go. Next slide, please. We've got to get to the, yeah, we need to get to the slideshow. From current slide. Are you hearing me okay, or do I have a?
I hear you.
Okay, good.
I hear you, but it sounds like you're right at the ocean.
Yeah, I hear a little bit of white noise behind it. And we are having technical difficulties.
A screen sharing difficulty.
Yeah, I think so.
And this PowerPoint is not, I know that it was emailed to.
Yeah, I think I can go find it and run it from my.
I don't think it was in the agenda packet though, so public wouldn't have it.
Dave, Sarah will be screen sharing your PowerPoint presentation.
Okay, so she's got it. Maybe.
Just 1 second.
Okay.
Oh, does this problem have to do with the switching over to laptops from desktops?
I'm not sure,
Hmm.
but I can screen share at this point. Oh, Sarah, did you get it or is that mine? That's mine. Here, let me go ahead and, oh no, we are seeing Sarah's screen. All right.
Let's see if she can flip through the slides. Can you move to the next slide so we see if it's working, Sarah?
There we go. All right, we'll just work off this one. Thank you. Sorry about that little delay. Under item 32 later, you'll be approving another quarterly water budget. That's the driver for the target values on the Carmel River and Seaside Groundwater Basin, the two regulated or adjudicated water supplies. And so what you can see here is actual is significantly below target. A lot of that has to do with how Cal-Am has decided to withdraw pure water Monterey water. But most significantly, if you look at the total, the difference is this 1,202 acre feet through this the end of May. And last month it was 605. So we're significantly tracking below the target. And again, that target was based on the cooperatively established water supply budget. So I think that's a positive signal. Next slide, please. With respect to the other sources of water, pure water Monterey recovery is looking pretty good, but the most important thing for us is how much has been delivered, because that's the supply issue. And through yesterday, there's been, for the fiscal year, so ending this June 30th, there's been 3,580 acre feet delivered to the system. Just again, for the fiscal, well over 5,000 for the 2 years of operation. But for the current year, 3,580 has been delivered, 3,414 has been delivered as company water to Cal-Am, and 166 has been placed in the operating reserve. We expect the 3,500 target to be reached in about 8 days.
You know, that's not the slide that we're seeing. Dan.
No, seeing those numbers.
That's this pure water Monterey recovery, and there you won't see that on the slide. It's just simply that this where you see actual 2609 recovered.
Mhm.
That's below what's been delivered to date. So I'm just letting you know that we've delivered to date 3,580. Some of it goes to the reserve, some of it straight to Cal-Am. But the 3,500 obligation to Cal-Am, we should hit in about 8 days. So we're looking. On table 13, the 68 of actual has remained static since the winter because that depends on rain. But Sand City at 101, that has remained low, but just shows 25 acre feet in the last month compared to our last report. So that's a good sign with respect to Sand City desal. Next slide, please. This is the measure of demand, production for customer service. So this is deliveries at basically the source or the wellhead. That total of 5,904 is 52 acre feet ahead of last year, whereas just last month, our total was only 8 acre feet ahead of last year. So for the month of May, customer demand was a little more aggressively below where it would have been for last year. And that's a positive sign. Next slide. This is, do you not have my modified? Hey, Joelle, remember the version I sent you? Tell you what.
We're missing the slide.
Yeah, let's just finish this and we'll come back to that slide because I can screen share it.
Okay.
And there's really nothing to talk about. Unrecorded rainfall. May was negligible.
Yeah.
Next slide. And this is the cumulative, and you can see basically a flat line, red line through the month of May.
Right.
Next slide. And unimpaired flow remains significantly below historical average, the blue being actual and the maroon being historical average. So conditions on the river, we're beginning to see some dry back or really narrowing of flow in the river, which is a bit of a challenge. But with that, I guess I'll just verbally give you the chart that didn't make it into this version of the presentation. And that's that, we've expressed a little concern over the Hertzberg bill. And this has gone in front of both the Water Supply and Water Demand Committee, that the Hertzberg bill is a proposal to require indoor residential water use to be at 47 gallons per capita per day, beginning January 1st of 2025, and 42 gallons per capita per day, beginning January 1st of 2030. We've gone into the urban water users reporting database at the State Water Board, and we pulled all of the months of reporting since June of 2016 through April of 2022. And we've calculated that all residential use, meaning all of the months for this service territory here on the Monterey Peninsula, is 59.9 gallons per capita per day. So going to the next step and trying to get a proxy for interior residential water use, we looked at only the December, January, February numbers, assuming that during the rainy season and the non-irrigation season that there wouldn't be outdoor irrigation and that all water use for the residential sector would reflect interior. That average is 52.2. And what that tells us is going from 52.2 to 42 is, basically a 20% reduction, which will be extraordinarily challenging for a coastal community of our kind that still has some exterior landscaping, but the interior use, using those 3 months as a proxy, still is a little bit high. So we have joined in a coalition sponsored by Aqua in a oppose unless amended position on the Hertzberg bill for that reason. Now, I can tell you, if we're stuck with it, then the seemingly two best ways to get there would be to either A, reduce the numerator, meaning maybe make a determination that irrigation continues even in December, January, and February. And so you can't just use those months as a proxy for only interior water use. And therefore, with some exterior use in those months, our current situation is even lower. And the second choice is try to increase the denominator. What's interesting for us is, the company can identify all the residential accounts, and they can look at the water use for those residential accounts. You can take out the hot irrigation months like we have, and then you can divide by population. Certainly population will change with the results of the census. But also we have quite a few residential accounts that are second homes that do get utilized. And they get utilized by people who don't take the census here locally. And so we may have to make an argument that actual residential population is higher, meaning the denominator would go higher, and that would make the gallons per capita per day go a little bit lower. So at some point, if this becomes important, those will be the strategies that we'll be looking at to try to get closer to compliance. But in the meantime, we're hopeful that these numbers can be perhaps challenged and modified in a more favorable direction for the peninsula. And that concludes my compliance report. One other item of interest I wanted to share with you without too much detail is in item 37, which is just informational, but it's letters received and sent. You will see a letter dated May 10th of 2022 to the chair of Monterey One Water from California American Water, challenging or expressing unhappiness at our decision to make ASR well number 1 unavailable for production. There's a couple of things in the letter that you should know. That there's an allegation of breach of the Pure Water Monterey Storage and Recovery Agreement with the Water Master and the Pure Water Monterey Water Purchase Agreement. Our analysis with our attorneys is that there is no breach, and that's not confidential, that is public. We've said so publicly. And further research into those agreements seems to further support that position, that there is no breach. And a number of the potential solutions identified in that letter are actually solutions we have identified for quite a period of time, and that we've been working on convincing California American to undertake, and they have now begun to undertake some of those potential solutions. And then finally, we do continue to meet and confer, and those are subject to confidentiality. But we are doing so as a courtesy because there is a dispute, not because we believe there's any breach. And we'll keep the board informed on all of those. But one last item is this letter was to Monterey One Water, asking for a reduction of injection rates and regulatory coordination. We, the district, do not believe a reduction in injection rates is consistent with the goal to increase water supplies available to the community in a water scarce environment. And we do not believe that cutting back on the promise of Pure Water Monterey is an appropriate response. Instead, we believe the focus should be on increasing alternate production capacity rather than reducing supply. And that will continue to be our focus, number 1. And number 2, the district owns the well. So Monterey One Water has no authority to act on their own to place that well back into production. And that's all I have to say on that topic. And that concludes the general manager's report.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you for updating us on and explaining to us and to the public the this dispute concerning ASR 1. And it's important for the public, I think, to understand that reducing injection, which is not is not a reasonable solution, as Cal-Am proposes, is unreasonable because it would reduce the water supply, and which we want to increase, not reduce, and that the problem about retention times of the water can be solved by, as you say, alternative extraction strategies. So producing from other wells. And that would enable us to produce as much as we, at least as much as we have contractually obligated to produce. So I don't know, the letter I found very misleading, and you explained it very well, that what the situation is as we see it. Do other directors have questions or comments? Yes, Director Anderson.
I have a question about the previous issue that you discussed, Dave, about the Hertzberg bill. And when you went to get the data, you said it was back to 2016 or 2013, something?
Yep.
If you take it more recently, from when I don't know what period we've had the biggest cutbacks here on the district, what time period the biggest cutbacks have been seen, would that give much of a different answer?
Yeah, that's a great question. We looked at 2 other alternatives. One is, hey, if people have really been working hard to decrease their water use, maybe we should just look at the most recent years. And And by the way, the data goes back to about 2013, but the reporting for us locally changed in June of 2016. Previously, it included the satellites, so you got,
Oh.
you know, Toro and the others. Now it's just the Cal-Am main system and just the Cal-Am main system population. So that's more representative from that June of 2016. But what we found is with the 2 recent dry winters, even if you tried to use just the winter data as a proxy for interior use, people must have been irrigating in February of this year and last year, because the numbers were actually pretty high in the winter. So I think that there actually is irrigation when it's a dry season. But there wasn't a whole lot of other evidence that gallons per capita per day were significantly better in just the most recent months. The other thing that jumped out at us is that we found that if you go back during this database to just the years that we called normal to wet, and then tried to only use the data from those months, because we knew for sure it rained in those months, it didn't change much. And so we just decided to go with the 2 that we're looking at. But I think, you know, it's not perfect. And also billing cycles and the way, you know, Cal-Am or any utility reports, you're reporting for a month, but, you know, months vary in length in terms of how many meter reads get done and so forth. So it's not always perfect data to begin with, but the order of magnitude is pretty close, pretty spot on. But so we think, you know, it comfortably tells us the range that we're in. I think I have shared before that there's a statement in the urban water management plan that shows a lower number. It isn't borne out by the data that the state has been collecting from all the urban water providers. So we're just trying to use that data.
Well, that's the second part of my question is the comparison with other districts in the state. Is it all over the map, or are they pretty close? I mean, it sounds like this is going to be a very hard number for anybody to get.
Yeah, well, so Santa Cruz asked for an exemption from having to go to stage 2. And it was granted due in part that their gallons per capita per day were significantly lower than the current standard, which is 55 gallons per capita per day. And then a statement was made that Santa Cruz County as a whole is super low, like in the 40s. And I don't know if they developed that from the same data source, but that's what the state is actually using now, is that data source. So they're able to set baselines based on whichever year they pick, or whichever month they want to look at. They have all that data, and the state's database, you know, it's like 20,000 lines, you know, so you've got, you know, roughly 403 or 405 reporting entities. Now, some of them, like a Cal-Am, they'll also report their Sacramento or their Northern Division. They'll also report LA. So they're reporting several different ones. Cal Water Service will be reporting, you know, 9 or more different entities. But then East Bay Mud is just one reporting entity. San Francisco is just one reporting entity. But it adds up to over 400. And when you think about it, you know, just even from 2016, that's, you know, 72 data points since June, you know, multiplied by 405 entities, and then add in what they have going back all the way to 2013. It's a huge database. But that's what the state's going to rely on to see how everyone's doing. And so, you know, they'll put together reports. They'll report back to Governor Newsom as to, you know, who's kind of performing admirably and who's underperforming. And that's where you may get, you know, later this summer, you may get a unilateral executive order from the governor's office again saying everyone must cut back 10%. And that's where entities like us and City of Santa Cruz are going to say, whoa, 10% from an already tight number is really hard to do. So we'll see, but at least we're looking at the right data at this point to know what everybody's doing. So if you did want to know, like a community outside of San Diego and see that they're using 3 times what we use per capita per day, I could show that to you just to make us feel more frustrated.
I think Director Roberson and Director Riley had something to say. Director Roberson, you want to go first?
You must have picked up my perennial frustration with state mandates, which one size fits all. So Governor Newsom, unlike Governor Brown, who demanded a 25% decrease in water use, Governor Newsom requested 15%. And then in March, in Southern California, it increased 25%. And I just saw today that it's gone down 2%. So once again, it's a little unrealistic. Secondly, I was just thinking, if you're doing an average per capita, that certainly can vary. It's for those of you who were around maybe 10 or 15 years ago, there was a report about the water consumption in certain high rent districts, particularly Pebble Beach, where the water consumption was way over the top. And some of the folks there said, it's okay, we can afford it and we'll pay for it. So when you use an average, it's not an accurate number. And thirdly, it sounds like each district is supposed to come up with its own formula. I don't see how that works. It's incumbent upon the bill, in my thinking, that there be a uniform way to figure out what the consumption is. Because you simply, I had a chance to talk to Senator Laird about this, and there's simply no way that you can figure out accurately how much water is interior and exterior unless you had separate meters, and that doesn't exist. So I think the whole idea of lobbying and amending this bill makes a lot of sense. Meanwhile, in today's Herald, it talks about millions of acres of lawns in California, which uses up about 10% of the water. And you just shake your head and think about our water district. I haven't seen a real lawn in ages. I'm pretty good at identifying fake lawn these days. And so the whole idea, again, coming out of the state of one size fits all, with honestly, without a lot of research and background into it, it's well intended. But it makes a lot more sense if we can get to our legislators and point out that one size does not fit all in this case. So that's just a little bit of the whole frustration of how do you figure out what's interior and what is exterior. So I guess a question would be for Dave, our general manager, is does the state have a formula, or does it fall upon each water district to figure out what's interior and what's exterior?
Yeah, well, the state has some research that's been provided by some think tanks, primarily the Pacific Institute, which, they discuss their methodology, but it's going to fall to the water districts because it is a regional thing, and somehow you have to set, as a water provider, your process stops at the meter, and you can determine what you've delivered to a residential account holder, but you can't figure out how they used it. And so trying to distinguish between interior use and exterior use becomes, a little bit of an art and a science, and that will fall to each of the individual providers because of the regional differences. I think what Pacific Institute's been trying to say is, no matter whether you live in the Inland Empire or Humboldt County, your interior use should be relatively the same, and that the only driver for the difference in total residential use is outdoor irrigation. But I'm not even convinced that that's truly the case. There's differences in how you have to hydrate depending on where you live, and so forth.
And also if you have teenagers at home.
Yeah, exactly.
I
And
can
the
tell you
dog.
right now, that water bill goes through the roof.
Yeah. I did want to tell you, I had mentioned this earlier. So reading from the Urban Water Management Plan, which is, you know, a CalAm document. Every urban water provider has to file one every 5 years. They make a statement, or their consultant makes a statement, says the regional residential water use within the Monterey, Maine, counting both indoor and outdoor, ranged from 48 to 52 gallons per capita per day from 2016 to 2020. And that's the statement I'm saying, that the data that's actually sent to the state doesn't really support it, unless you just wanted to say in 1 month there was 48, but there's also months that were closer to 60. So we have had months that are down at the low end and certainly compliant with, you know, meeting the 47 or being below 50. But across the whole spectrum of data, it's not averaging out that way.
As a follow-up, I'm sorry, George, if you don't mind, and that is, so this bill is looking at residential use. When you look at the city of Monterey with so many hotel rooms and restaurants, it doesn't sound like that's part of the intent of this bill. And you look at it statewide and the amount of water that's used commercially, it has to be a huge number. And then again, the whole point is 80% of the water used in California is for agriculture. And so all of these efforts that are being made they're symbolic, and they do have some value. But on the other hand, we're a desert with rice fields, dairy farms, and almond orchards. And almond orchards use 10% of the water in the entire state. So anyway, you probably lost my question in my soliloquy.
But it's a great soliloquy.
Thank you so much.
Were you able to share these thoughts with Senator Laird?
I have, and I will continue to do so.
That's very good. Okay, before I ask my question, Director Riley.
Well, I had a question on your second subject, which was the letter from CalAm to Monterey One Water. I think their letter describes the reason why they are concerned, CalAm is concerned, is because it interferes with their ability to plan confidently for the water supply availability. It's the potential for water rather than the actual need for water. Am I misreading that letter a little bit? Because I don't think they can prove, I don't think CalAm can prove there's an actual demand for water from the well we're talking about.
Well, it's a very productive well. It's higher capacity, and so the desire to use it is understandable. But I think there's some selective amnesia going on as well. Any use other than for aquifer storage and recovery is called an extraordinary use. So recovery of pure water Monterey water, or recovery of native water, just water from the seaside basin that they have a right to, is an extraordinary use. Under yet another agreement that hasn't been cited in any of this, they have to get our permission to do that. So the desire to use it makes sense because it's a very efficient, productive well. But our letter to them cited the fact that years ago they knew they needed redundant extraction capacity and additional extraction capacity, and they were expecting that to happen with Pure Water Monterey expansion. Then some of their supporters at Monterey One Water stymied the SEIR approval, delayed the expansion by a year, more than a year. And here we sit now. The PUC application process is really slow, delaying the expansion, basically by another year. And all during this time, it was known that even without the expansion, there's a need for additional extraction capacity. And so those actions could have been taken, but it was too easy to point to ASR well number one and say, well, we've got that. There's no reason to act. And so, without getting into a lot of additional detail, the solutions have been known for quite some time. But our agreement on the ASR facilities is we're the injector, and we're subject to the regional board's waste discharge requirements, and they're the extractor, and they're certified for potable water delivery. And so they have been using, our well, we own it, in extraction mode as the certified water producer. And that was the agreement. But, there's other things in the agreement that talk about cooperation and agreement. And obviously we're not cooperating or in agreement here. And then, as I said, there's also language about extraordinary use, which is different than just Carmel River water being injected and recovered. So it's, the remainder will be subject to more meet and confer, and we'll get there. All the agreements are public knowledge, and what they say is public knowledge. So there will just be some reminding that has to happen. But, the addition of the Peralta well so that it can produce water that can go to the Monterey pipeline, there is capacity there. It's not all the time and every month. And so it'll come down to how can they schedule or dispatch water throughout their system, possibly without ASR1 as an available well. It may be that they need to bring in a drilling rig and drill a replacement well at a location and have it ready to go in a year. We've suggested that as well. There are things that can happen, but the Pure Water Project is meeting its delivery, its water treatment guarantee. It's delivering high quality water to the delivery point. So there's no breach of the water purchase agreement. And there's, in our opinion, as I've said, there's no breach of the storage and recovery agreement. So it's a lot of posturing and public posturing, and we're going to have to work through it. We're one big happy family working for the same end, which is to provide safe, abundant water to our consumers in the Monterey Peninsula.
I just want to add that I support your rationale that we do not want to jeopardize the entire Pure Water Monterey project by allowing extractions that may undermine our permit, our conditions under which we operate through the state. And I don't want to undermine that at all. And I just want to add that I support that, and I continue to.
And the conditions you're referring to, the water quality, the retention time requirement. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, totally agree.
Thank you, Dave.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And I know if we could just focus on the solutions, which you say have been known for a long time, and are, then this could be resolved a lot quicker to everybody's benefit. So continue to hope that we can get everybody focused on solutions. On the Hertzberg bill, what's the time frame for this bill to go through the process? And has Aqua already proposed amendments?
Yes, and Aqua led the coalition letter. I'll have to see what got sent. I never saw the final letter, but it's slated for debate this session.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments about the general manager's report?
And not to belabor this much further, but during the mayor's soliloquy, he did mention that the hotels are full, and that does factor into the commercial water use. And so what's going to be happening going forward, in addition to the Hertzberg threat of gallons per capita per day, there's also going to become a annual water use target that each urban water system is going to have to provide. And then there will be a measure afterwards to see how close they came to their target. And that does include commercial. And so, you know, the company will have to look at all its commercial accounts and make certain assumptions about hotel occupancy and going forward, because you can normalize some of the hotel data. There are periods like during COVID when occupancy rates were down. And then, so you could, you know, normalize the data and come up with some forecast as to what typical commercial use is going to be. But it's going to be the sum of the parts: indoor residential, outdoor residential, and then commercial, industrial, institutional, and other. And they'll all combine up for this target that will then also get monitored. So what we're seeing is greater monitoring and regulatory involvement in retail water usage than we've seen in the past. And it'll continue in non-drought years, just as part of the overall, you know, conservation as a way of life approach that the state is using.
Through the chair, if I may, Dave, I know that question was going to be asked at Water Demand, should we hire a consultant to look at this? Do you think we should, or we should keep going with the staff on this issue?
Yeah, you know, I'll be honest with you. I think staff does a very good job of understanding where the data is and how to manipulate it. So I think we're in a pretty good place. If we come up with some point we have to prove and we can't figure out how to do it, then, you know, definitely would come to you for a consultant. But, you know, as of right now, I think we're in an okay place. I think as we begin to look at some of the supply and demand analysis, you know, whenever you try to do something right after a census, finding the right population numbers becomes a challenge. And so we're right at that point where I'm not sure we've got the best population data yet, but we're working on doing that. But other than that, I think we're in pretty good shape.
Okay, thank you.
Director Henderson.
I've got one more question for now. Could you separate out the multiple dwellings like apartment buildings where individual households are not responsible for paying a separate water bill, to see if there's perhaps, you know, much less awareness of water use? And if there is, that could be some focus of the outreach that we do. But it seems to me it's possible. Might not add up to anything, but it would be possible because those people aren't in touch with what they're using.
Yeah, so it can be done. We do not have the data. CalAm, my understanding is that if it's a multifamily but individually metered, then it shifts its way over to single family. And the multifamily is typically what you described, the master metered, you know, large building or building complex with a single master meter. They have that data. And if we wanted to do a particular communication, that's part of the reason we're working with CalAm jointly on all this drought outreach or drought reach. But yeah, we don't have that ability right now with the data sets that we have.
Thank you.
And I can tell you one of the other aspects that we've been concerned about with multifamily is the common laundries. And there's two forms of common laundries. One is that's owned and operated by the building or the homeowners association itself. And the other is where they lease the room to a company. And the companies, one of them's name is Wash. There's about 3 of them that serve the Southern Bay Area and Monterey Peninsula. And a lot of theirs are ancient coin-operated machines that should have been replaced a long time ago. Today we were out looking at a leak that seems to have a little bit of finger pointing going either way between 2 multifamily developments in Monterey, kind of back up behind Monterey Peninsula College. And we took the opportunity to stick our head in the laundry room, and lo and behold, high efficiency washing machines. So some people are doing the right thing, or some organizations are doing the right thing, but many aren't. And that's where it happens a lot, is the master metered, multifamily, and you can't even see the difference between what the washing machines are using and what people are using, because it's all just lumped together.
That's a challenge.
Before I ask my last question, any other comments or questions from directors? Do you know, Dave, or maybe possibly one of the directors knows, is the legislature still considering any legislation related to changing agricultural uses or practices to conserve water? I vaguely recall that something was proposed, but I haven't followed. George, do you know?
I do not know.
Okay. Okay, that's a research project. Thank you.
Yeah, well, so they, in the San Joaquin area, they started to introduce voluntary agreements to do environmental flow, environmental releases. It's not clear that that's going to be sufficient, but that was in reaction to proposed regulatory standards. So increasing releases for the environment at the expense of releases for agriculture. So there's a lot afoot, but it's kind of regionally specific.
No, I'm thinking along the lines of less almond, changing crops to crops that require less water, less irrigation, that sort of thing. All right, we'll look into that outside of the meeting and find out about it.
We can have a whole session on political suicide.
All right.
Well, I just can't resist one last comment. Meanwhile, you've got RENA numbers, which says the city of Monterey has to add 3,600 housing units. And then you've got the ADU ordinance, which turned all our single family residential areas into quadruplexes and no local control. And you just want to go, what? Oh, so it's just thank you for listening.
Okay. Let's move on to our report from our council. Fran?
Thank you, Madam Chair, directors. I have two items that I can report on as of this afternoon. In the proceeding at the PUC for the expansion of Pure Water Monterey, reply briefs were submitted, and the judge now has 90 days in which to issue a proposed decision. So sometime in September, if we're lucky sooner, but we don't know. Meanwhile, as of July 20, Phase 2 of that proceeding will begin with testimony by Cal-Am as to their assessment of what long-term supply and demand will be. And the district will respond to that along with others a month later. So that's ongoing. Also, I should mention that Cal-Am's general rate case will be filed July the 1st. And that is a massive filing. It's a 3-year cycle where they're trying to anticipate what all of their revenue needs will be, both for operations and capital expenses. And the district participates in that. So we'll have more PUC information to share with you. The other matter I did want to report on occurred this past Friday, which was June the 17th. Judge Wills heard Cal-Am's motion to intervene in the lawsuit that the district filed against LAFCO. And while he granted their motion to intervene, he put significant constraints on their participation, some of which District Council Laredo has summarized that I want to read to you. CalAm shall not seek any extension of time unless parties agree. CalAm shall address only issues that LAFCO does not address at all. This means CalAm cannot add arguments to issues LAFCO addresses. CalAm shall not address issues of bias or the lack of a neutral panel. If a settlement is reached between the Water Management District and LAFCO, the court will determine whether CalAm has any standing to object should they reach a settlement. CalAm will not be allowed to prolong the litigation, and the court will control CalAm's participation through careful page limits. And if you don't understand why the judge put these constraints on, it's as we saw in the proceeding before LAFCO, it was not uncommon to see filings of 300 and 400 pages. And so because we have provided the administrative record on the LAFCO proceeding and the judge is aware of it, I think that's the justification for many of these constraints. So that concludes my report, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the report and reply brief that was filed just this afternoon. So probably most of the directors haven't had a chance to look at it, but I did, and I was very pleased with the reply brief. Good brief on behalf of the district. And the conditions are also very good news for our litigation. Any comments or questions? All right, then let's move on to directors' reports on meetings of other agencies and so on. Any directors' reports? Yes, Director Riley.
I attended the Water Master. They have a subcommittee on public outreach or public awareness. They met on June the 14th recently. They're trying to put, the Water Master is trying to put together a public information slideshow of some sort and a presentation to make people more aware of the value of the Seaside groundwater basin to the entire water supply availability on the peninsula. I'm on the committee. My concern is that my concern is with the Water Master. It's like yelling Chicken Little. It's a little bit like yelling the sky's falling, and that's my concern. Is that's their message, and yet they have no other thoughts about how to proceed with dealing with the problem. The issue is it's being overdrafted. It continues to be overdrafted. There is a threat of seawater intrusion. All of that is factually true. But what my concern is that, and I'm supporting them trying to put together some kind of public information program. That I'm okay with that. But I think that as long as the Water Master just yells fire, 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 and they don't have any suggestions about how to approach it or address it or resolve it or at least attack it somehow, then they are not doing the public any favors and they're not doing themselves any favors. So that's my angle on the discussion. And anyway, I just want you to know that they're working on that. There's nothing imminent. The plan is to have some kind of outreach slideshow of some sort sometime this fall. So there's still time to kind of figure out if there's anything there that we ought to be worried or concerned about, or even suggest some improvements and whatever. And then it's still a process. It's still a project in process. But I just want you to know that what I think they're trying to do and what I think the shortcomings are of what they're trying to do. And at least that's my message to them so far. I just wanted you to know that. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I attended Seaside City Council, first meeting of their month in June, and mentioned to them about stage 2, mentioned to them about our budget. Those items I mentioned to them and told them a couple of numbers. The 500,000 I think we're using for Measure J, and Measure J is still alive, and just trying to keep them informed. So I attended that meeting. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Other reports? Okay. So now we shall open the public hearing on item 32. The water supply strategies. Is John going to make a presentation about this, about item 32?
I'm prepared to, Chair Paul.
Is that the plan?
Correct. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Awesome. I think, good evening, board and Chair Paul. I believe Joel has figured out, if he's texted me, that he's gotten control of his new laptop.
Very good.
So, yeah, this is.
Able to see my screen share?
Yes.
Yes, we got you. Thanks, Joel. Okay, this is, as was stated, item 32, public hearing, which is consider to adopt the quarterly water budget for the months of July, August, and September of 2022. This was as always, was developed by the quarterly water budget strategy team, and it was developed earlier this month. So next slide, please. We consider many different items, being the sources of water, the different jurisdictions and water rights that are available to produce from, as well as water projects, and as well as take a look forward at what we think precipitation is going to be. You can see here that we have equal chances of a normal precipitation event July through September, which is no rain for July through September. So we have planned accordingly. Next slide, please. The quarterly water budget, of course, considers the state board orders of 9510, 9804, 2202, and the cease and desist order that describe how and when water can be produced out of the Carmel River Basin, and as well as the adjudication decision. And also with the type of year where the cease and desist order lower limit set in the middle of the year, resulting in a limit off the river for the water water year of 4,100 acre feet. Looking at ASR, we had a dry year this year. We injected 71 acre feet over the winter. Additory to what was in storage, we have just over 1,300 acre feet in storage. And when we went back and sharpened our pencils, the group decided to leave this in storage and use it in water year 2023 if necessary, if the drought were to continue and we needed this source of water to get through the next water year, and rely more on production of pure water Monterey and Seaside native water. Table 13 writes, we had some water only in the storms in late December and early January, and we have not had any more since then. And for Pure Water Monterey, we decided to continue to recover Pure Water Monterey through this final quarter of water year 2022, and to target the number of about 975 acre feet. And as Dave stated earlier, this is going to stay on pace with injection and have little to no effect on the operational reserve. Next slide, please. So we also assume to use all of Seaside Basin's coastal sub-area native water. So that's the 1474. So we plan to recover all of that, take full advantage of that. As we stated, we're going to store ASR. This comes with the support of Fish and Game and NOAA Fisheries to lean on Pure Water Monterey and bank ASR. We want it also, as we stated, to keep pure water Monterey injection and recovery about equal to themselves, and keep the reserve keep the reserve where it is and enter 2023 with the full reserve. And this was developed on June 14th, and the quarterly water budget group is, of course, our district, California American Water, Fish and Wildlife, and NOAA Fisheries, as well as the State Water Resources Control Board. So the next slide, I believe, has the proposed water budget on it. Does. So as we move through this table, you can see that the effect of producing off the lower subunits. This is none of the out of the upper subunits, and this is because one of the state board orders, it requires production out of the lower valley when flow is in what's called the low flow regime, which is defined as 20 cubic feet per second, 5 consecutive days at the Don Juan Bridge at Garland Park, and we are well into that regime. So planning for no rain moving forward, only production out of the lower valley wells, and it would be about 400 for July and August and just over 300 for September. And so this will keep us within the 4,100 range proposed and shown for the river for water year 2022. So then the rest of the supply comes out of the Seaside groundwater basin with an even amount of 225 coming out of the coastal sub areas, and that's the native water recovering up to the full 1474. ASR recovery is set at 0, reflecting the banking of the water moving into water year 2023. Sand City desalination is held at 25. And the remainder of the supply necessary will come out of Pure Water Monterey at about 325 a month, totaling at the bottom about 900, close to 1,000, about 980 in August, and about just under 900 in September. And so if I can answer any questions on the budget or the logic behind the budget, if there are any.
Thank you. Director Adams.
I'm just curious, when you had the meeting and all of the people who were involved had discussion, were people generally all in agreement on this plan, or do you vote on it, and is it a unanimous vote?
There's not a voting. It's a committee, like kind of more of an ad hoc type committee. The reason the committee exists is a fish kill incident from the 80s, so it's been around a long time, and so it's more of a discussion and an understanding with the desire to educate our regulators, especially, and produce water in kind of the most environmentally responsible way for the community and meet the community's needs. So the tenor of the meeting is very agreeable, and people understanding and kind of educating. The driver behind the main decision for the fisheries groups who want to bank ASR is we have an agreement through this committee that they get buy-off on how ASR is recovered to benefit the resource they are protecting. So while there is Pure Water Monterey available, they would prioritize that with the blessing of the group and hold back as much water in their ASR bank that they have, because they have more control over how that's used to protect the resource. So that's the reason they wanted that decision. And we, at this point, because that's about the amount of water you could get out of the Seaside Basin every month with the existing well field, it's somewhat academic accounting of water. It could be Pure Water Monterey, it could be ASR, an acre foot of one or the other. And with that being the case, the decision was made to bank the ASR and just recover the Pure Water Monterey. But there's no voting, and it's a very informational and cooperative environment.
Thank you very much for that.
Vice Chair Adams, did you have a comment on the process, which sounds like...
I'm good. It sounds like it's wonderful. I'm happy. It's nice somebody gets along.
Yeah, it works. They work together productively. It's good to hear. Yes, Director Anderson.
I have a question, and it's just clarifying something for me from the chart. I don't understand the Seaside groundwater basin, the number 490, and it says 326%.
Can we put that back up, Joel?
Percent of year to date. Next to the 490.
Yeah, that's tracking the budget numbers for percent of year to date. So there was a component of the decision made to put some water into reserves at a previous point in time and to recover native water instead. And that was, if you want to deviate. So the reason the quarterly water budget comes to this board is the CEQA authority for the Carmel Valley Alluvial Aquifer. And so the way that the quarterly water budget works is this is adopted by this board, and then it is adhered to unless the quarterly water budget meets again and decides to do something different for a different reason. And so there was a decision where pure water Monterey had been scheduled to be recovered, and there was a decision to put water into the reserves, and instead of recovering pure water Monterey, recover native water. So some native water was recovered ahead of schedule of the actual adopted quarterly water budget, but it was a decision that was made by the group. So that's reflected in that number. But it is budgeted back out that the amount will be recovered, and it will end at the 1474 of native water out of the Seaside Basin. So it was more of a pure water Monterey operational decision that was different than the adopted budget.
Okay. Thank you. I don't pretend to totally understand that, but I'll go with it.
Other questions? John, thank you very much. And good news that the working group works together well. I should have said at the outset what we are doing with this item tonight is there's a public hearing on the quarterly water budget. So let's take it out to the public and see if the public has anything to say.
Sarah, could you share the timer? And at this time, I would like to invite Tom Rowley. Tom, when you're ready, please present your comment.
Yes, actually, I wanted to comment on George Riley's comment about the usage of the Seaside Basin. When you look at the quarterly data that you just presented, the statement, it really pops out at you about the 2/3 of all the water is coming out of Seaside and only about 1/3 from the Carmel Valley. I mentioned in years past several times about the reliance on one main water system, the problems that can happen that are not expected. In Hawaii, I was very familiar and lived in the area where the underground tanks were near Red Hill, which now, due to leaks, the Secretary of Defense of the United States has ordered the whole 20 tanks to be shut down and all the fuel removed because of contamination of households that were provided water that got leaked from the piping systems into the near water table. This is one of the inherent dangers of putting too much into one basket if something goes wrong. I just say that you cannot downplay the importance of the Seaside Basin. And I like to suggest to George that the more light you can put on how it works, why it's safe, etc., the better off it's going to be over the long haul. So that's just a comment. Concerns that I knew and was familiar in Hawaii turned out to be just rumors, but turned out to be rumors that turned out to be true and actual and factual, and have now produced billions of dollars of costs for the federal government and the Defense Department budget. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rowley. Other public? Any other hands raised from the public?
Let's give it a couple moments here.
Okay. The comment from Mr. Rowley brings to mind, and this is a question for Dave Stolt. Now, as of this year, isn't Pure Water Monterey providing something like 36% of the water delivered in the CalAm main system?
Yeah, so I actually have a couple numbers for you. Yep, that's spot on. So given average demand over the last several years of about 9,700 acre feet, 3,500 is 36% of the total. When you add in the other Seaside Basin allocations, so the 1,474, then what you have is, it's more like half, just over half of the total. If you were to just think of the three, strongest firm supplies, 3,500 from Pure Water Monterey, 1,474 from Seaside Basin, and 3,376 from the Carmel River going forward. So not this current water year, but next water year. Then the Carmel River will be about 40%, and the Seaside Basin will be about 60%. And, we can produce additional Pure Water Monterey water. It's unclear now, but the company originally expressed an interest in doing so. Now there's some discussion that maybe they don't have an interest in doing so, but yeah, you could rely on even more from Pure Water Monterey. So the ratio of north to south and water stored in the Seaside Basin is getting to be about 2/3.
Thank you. So eventually expanded recycling production could help with the replenishing the seaside aquifer that Riley was talking about earlier. Is that right?
Absolutely.
If a way can be found to finance that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, for the early years with Pure Water Monterey expansion, there will be quite a bit of excess water that can be used for protective water levels, drought reserve, just a supply bank, if you will.
Will be good to start construction on that as soon as possible. All right, other
And Chair Paul, we have one raised hand.
Good, let's go.
And at this time, I would like to invite Susan Schiavone. Susan, when you're ready, please present your comment.
Thank you, and good evening to everybody on the solstice. I wanted to just say that it seems like talking about these three subjects recently, the letter from CalAm, the issue with the Seaside Basin, the water budget, and talking about what's going on. And the element of politics is still creeping in here. And I hope that all parties can come together and actually work this out about the ASR one well as supply and expanding the recycled water, because all of the delays that CalAm and its supporters did, as someone else had pointed out, really put more pressure on this situation than should be at this point. And I think if they would work together better, and also the Seaside Water Master seems to have had a real lag in terms of talking about what's going on, and suddenly we're now at where they want to call it a crisis when this could have been also addressed much earlier in time. So I hope all of the parties can come together and really stop the underground pushing of the desal plant by delaying tactics and by delaying resolutions to real problems that are in existence that can be solved if everybody works together to make that happen. That's really kind of all I wanted to say, because that impression kind of came to me as I'm listening to all of this. And thank everybody for all the hard work you're doing. Thank you.
Appreciate your comments. Thank you.
And
Is there
Chair
someone?
Paul, I do not see any raised hands, so I'll return this back to the board.
Thank you. If there are no further comments, is there a motion on this item? Okay,
I make a motion that we move approval of this item.
that we approve it, okay. Is there a
I'll
second? Mayor Roberson, second. Okay, let's have a roll call vote, please.
Director Edwards,
Approval?
Director Malik,
Yes.
Director Riley,
Aye.
Director Anderson,
Yes.
Director Roberson,
Yes.
Vice Chair Adams,
Aye.
Chair Paul.
Yes,
The motion carries on a vote of 7-0.
good, thank you. So tonight we have two action items, and the first is item 33 on our budget for the next fiscal year.
And before we turn this over to Suresh for the finance show, I did want to draw your attention to Exhibit B for this item, which is the budget document. Suresh and I have co-authored an addition at pages 11 through 13, which tells a little bit more of the district's story and a focus on water supply at the request of the board from the, and I think primarily Director Riley from the last workshop.
And it is phenomenal. It is a phenomenal addition. It is just over 2 pages, and it says what the district does so well. And I mean, you've done a great service to the district and to the public by writing that. That's exactly what I think Director Riley was hoping for. So I thank the two of you, Dave and Suresh, for that. And thanks Director Riley for suggesting that we use the budget to let people know better what the district does. And your new intro really does that well.
Through the chair, I hope we cover that for the public.
We do have a slide on.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you.
some-
It doesn't make sense
summary.
to do it if the public don't get it. All right. Thank you.
All right, good evening, Chair, members of the board. Joel, would you please bring up my slideshow? There are going to be a few repeated slides from the May 26th budget workshop, but for public consumption, it's necessary to show them. I won't take very long. This is going to be a very short presentation. The one item we did earlier tonight was to change the title of the staff note and the agenda itself. It's not review, but it's actually consider adoption of the proposed fiscal year 22-23 budget. So this action tonight that we are asking for is to adopt the proposed budget for fiscal year starting July 1. Next slide, please. Showing the budget overview calendar, basically how we arrived to tonight, which is highlighted in yellow, June 20th. We did go through the distribution of the memos, getting the staff request put together. We reviewed the budget through team managements, and then we presented the proposed budget to the entire board at a budget workshop on May 26th. And then here we are tonight. And as David mentioned, the comments received at the May 26th were incorporated into the final budget document. And we'll go over that briefly here. So next slide, please. So just reminding the board, the adopted strategy back in 2005, it was to develop the annual balanced budgets, which we try to do very hard every year. We do try to make sure that we preserve the existing services of the district to make sure that we are able to carry out our mission and the board's strategic vision. Also in 2005, when the board adopted the three-pronged strategy, one was to maintain a 5% operating reserve and replenish it to 50% over 5 years. And so looking at the 5-year gap on the general operating reserve, we have kind of like hovering around at 50%. Sometimes it goes anywhere from 45 to about 55% or something. This year's budget, it gets us to about 53% of the general operating reserve. And I'll show you the numbers on the next slides here. So we have not been able to balance the budget in some years, and that's primarily because we have that heavy CIP project work with the PWM, Pure Water Monterey projects last few years, but then we also had the Aquifer Storage Recovery, ASR project. So there are some years that we have heavy CIP projects, and those are the years that really cash is needed. And for cash flow purposes, the General Operating Reserve Fund gets used, and so we are not able to develop the balanced budget without the use of reserves. This year's budget, again, it's the same thing. We have included the use of reserves, but again, these reserves are not reserves per se that we are using that to fund the balance. What it is, fund the budget. What it is basically carry forward projects that were budgeted for last fiscal year have not been completed, and so we are carrying forward those numbers. But technically, for accounting purposes, what happens is when we close the year, if a project has not been completed, we have to move that money into the general operating reserve, and then we carry forward the project into the next fiscal year. So basically, we are drawing the money back from the operating reserve. So that's why the terminology, the definition is we are using the reserves, but really it's just the carryover of the projects. And then, as I had mentioned, the total operating reserve is going to be at 53% of the budget. So that stands at about $14.1 million for this fiscal year. Next slide, please. We were mindful of the current status of our funding status and primarily the continuing COVID impact. We did evaluate things, prices of things have been going up. So we have been mindful of that. We did take that into account and incorporate that into the budget. The original division request, when they were submitted, we did review them. We did trim those, made adjustments during our team management budget sessions. And then the format of the budget is same as presented in previous years. So there was no major change, except for this one. We've added 3-page of the capital project. We emphasized on the capital project. So that's the new addition this year's budget. And we'll continue doing that as we move forward. We will try and have a focus on capital projects and make sure that we kind of like highlight the budget with those. Emphasize more on the water projects. Next slide, please. This is what we had captured in the 3-page memo sort of thing on the water supply project. So since 2013, we have spent about $39 million on water projects, and that's our district money. Money that comes in from user fee, water supply charge, property tax. And then we've also been able to secure about $100 million in federal and state funded water projects. So we've been able to secure grants and do projects for that. So all in all, it's about $140 million in water projects over the since 2013. The continued focus remains on water conservation, even though we are focusing on water supply projects, but we also focus on water conservation as well. And then our continued efforts on environmental stewardship. We continue to do the mitigation work and all that. And then all in all, doing all that, we also maintain our transparency, which means we do all of the highlights, do our act for reports as well. And anything that requires transparency, we are out there for public's consumption. So transparency is maintained at all times. So the proposed 22-23 budget, it's about $32.6 million. It is higher than 21-22, but primarily because of the projects. Full year of user fee revenues are included in this proposed budget. And again, that user fee is based on estimate from CalAm collection of water revenues. We will continue to monitor that collection and make adjustments as necessary during the mid-year budget process.
Yeah, and one thing to point out too is the the pure water Monterey purchase and resale is a growing and significant part of the budget, and the price of that water, due to primarily chemicals and energy, has about a 20% increase. So this kind of inflationary period that we're in is having an impact on the price of water, and that's being passed through our budget.
Next slide, please, Joel. So it does anticipate a full year of water supply charge included in this proposed budget. We also have a full year of property tax revenue. And as David said, the full year of PWM water sales as well. The revenue and expenses both are included in the budget. And again, we will monitor all of the revenues. And if any adjustments are necessary, we will definitely make those adjustments during the mid-year budget process. So to highlight the total expenditures, $32.6 million. As you can see, 22% of the entire budget goes towards the project expenses. As David mentioned, the PWM water purchase, that's about 38% of our entire budget, $12.2 million. And it has gone up about 20%. And as David mentioned, due to chemical and other costs. Reimbursement projects, about 15%. And then personal cost is about 14%, $4.4 million. And some of those other slices there that's been highlighted here. Next slide, please. And this again shows a 5-year district expenditure history. Highlighted that at the budget workshop as well. So basically you can see some of those bars are fairly stable, except when we started getting the PWM water purchase. So that's that new bar, the darker blue on top, starting with the year 2020 and 2021. Also, the one below that, the lighter green one, is the project expenses, and that's the one that basically it does fluctuate year to year, and all depends on what type of projects we have going on. So there's that fluctuation. But other than that, the red one, the lighter blue towards the bottom, those are all fairly constant. Those are salaries, benefit taxes, operating expenses. So those are all relatively stable going year to year. Next slide, please. Looking at the revenue summary on the $32.6 million, where the money's coming from. Water supply charge, 10%, $3.4 million. Property tax, about 2.5 or 8% of the budget. PWM water sales, this is direct pass-through from the expense side. It's $12.2 million, and that's 37% of that $32 million. And then here's the carry forward that I had mentioned, which is basically using of the reserves. That's 4%. Reimbursements, these are rebate reimbursements from CalAm customers, the ASR O&M agreement we have with the California American Water. So this is that. We have the capacity fee, about $500,000. Then we have grants coming in about 11% or $3.4 million. And then on top, the darker blue user fee, which is $5.5 million estimated for this fiscal year. It's about 17% of the budget. So this is where all the money is coming from to fund the $32.6 million budget. Next slide, please. And looking at the chart, a 5-year history on the revenue side, again, it's fairly stable. You can see all of those components there, except when we start getting the PWM sales about 2020, 2021. And the reason why the 2020 and 2021 is such a low number is because that was only about 6-7 months out of the full year. It wasn't a 12-month revenue, but 21-22 is 12 months, and 22-23 is going to be 12 months as well. Next slide, please. So sources and users, we just like to highlight this. Total expenses about $31.3 million. Reserves, the $1.3 million. That makes it that $32.6 million. On the sources side, district revenues, $24.3 million. Reimbursements, about 6.2. And then the carry forward in reserves, about a little over $2 million. So that makes that $32.6 million. So we try to balance the revenue to the expenses. And that's why we draw money from reserves or we put surplus money into reserves. Next slide. Looking at the analysis of reserves. So we are estimating the June 30th, 2022 year to be finishing off with $18.3 million. And you can see all of those categories lined up there, the litigation, insurance reserve, capital reserve, and other reserves. And then you see the operating reserve at $15.1 million. And then the highlighted, the shaded part is where we are proposing the fiscal year budget to end June 30th, 2023 with little over $18.1 million. So you'll see some of those changes there. Capital reserve, that changes because we are proposing to put money, set money aside for the capital replacement reserve project. The pension OPEB reserve, we are again proposing to set money aside for that. So that jumps up a little bit. Mechanics Bank, we are proposing to set aside $500,000. The $500,000 that was set aside this fiscal year that has already been paid to Mechanics Bank. So that's why you see that number is still going to be $500,000, but that's because the reserve right now stands at $0 because we had accrued the money, paid the money to Mechanics Bank, and now we're planning on accruing it again in fiscal year 22-23. So all in all, $14 million on the operating reserve, 18.1, and the last statement there, it says operating reserve ending balance, which is using that $14 million number. That's about 53% of the operating budget. Next slide, please. Just like to remind the obligations commitments, we do show this. There are some future obligation commitments, and we just kind of like to highlight what they are. Water allocation process, about $200,000. Rabobank or Mechanics Bank, I will change that name there. Mechanics Bank debt due June 2023, that stands at about $2.7 million. Or with that $500,000 payment, it should stand at $2.2 million. PWM water reserve, about $1.9 million, and this is buying the reserve water and setting aside. We still have to do that. The pension obligation, last time we did that in December, that was about $6.5 million. That keeps changing based on the market. And then the OPEB obligation, about $4.5 million. Again, that number was shared with the board in December. And the new numbers should be coming out for both pension and OPEB in about August of this year. So once that shows up, we will definitely share that with the board. So the obligations commitment stands at about $15.8 million. Next slide, please. So that's about it with my presentation. The recommendation is that the board receive the proposed 22-23 budget and that the board adopt the resolution number 2214, which is adopting the budget. You are muted, Director Paul.
Thank you, Suresh. Dave, did you want to add anything before we turn to questions? Okay, questions or comments from directors? Yes, Director Riley.
Sometimes I think I must spend my night dreaming about what questions I'm going to ask. Anyway, thank you, Dave and Suresh, for this little narrative that I see more descriptive. And I just want to add a comment. I've got several things I want to cover, but I can kind of break it into pieces here. I think this is this narrative that you put together is a basis for a newsletter. And then, so anyway, I'm not trying to suggest a particular plan going forward. It's just my thoughts. But when there's an outreach effort, I think we ought to be considered the voters, the businesses, community organizations. We don't have access to a customer base, as I understand it. Cal-Am does, but we do not. But we can have access to a voter base, business base, and community organizations. So it's just a thought. And I think in the future, if we anyway, this is for a different discussion. So I won't go into details on that.
Talking about public outreach.
Public outreach, yes, yeah. That discussion will happen, and I'm on that committee, and I'm glad I am. Going to page 199, which is just the pie chart for expenditures for a moment. Suresh, can you highlight if it's 20% higher than it was a year ago? Can you highlight where that 20% is mostly occurring?
Yes, Director Riley, it is shown on page 200 and, let's see, 201.
Okay,
So if you'd go to page 201, you'll see change from previous year. It's both in dollars and percentage, and that's exactly where that 20% number is coming from.
and
So
the
you'll see-
largest percentage seems to be in the fixed assets or project expenditures. Is that
Correct.
fair? Okay. Okay, and then I have a question about, okay, on page 201, in that bottom category, debt service, et cetera, there's a drought reserve number that goes from 230,000 to 730,000 plus 500,000, back down to 230,000. And so I see that difference. What happened? What was the increase in 2020 this past year, this current year?
Right. So that line item, Director Riley, is not flood drought reserve. It's the debt service. And so back in 2021 or the current, 21-22, the fiscal years, we paid that additional $500,000 towards the debt. So that's that 500,000.
Oh, okay. So that was a payment that we made at the time.
Correct.
Okay. And anyway, I'm gonna take a pass now and let some other board members pursue, but I have a couple more questions and a couple more categories.
Okay, we'll come back to you. Other directors have questions or comments on the budget? Yes, Director Edwards.
Thank you. In our packet, we have page 209. Did you go over that page? You know, this is something I think the public should see where the money is being spent. And that page, that's covering project description, the expenditures that we're spending money on. Did we cover that page or?
So Director Edwards, I did not highlight that page for this meeting. I did that on May 26th.
Yes, but I think at this meeting is I think that page is really valuable to us because it shows where we're spending the money and what we are going to be doing in the future. You know, so I wish y'all would have put that page in there. In the future, I wish y'all would put that page in there. The project description and where we're spending the money on. Because, you know, we spend it on the dam. There's several items in there. That's where that money is going. And that's where that water supply money is going that we're trying to keep. All right, thank you.
Very, very true, Director Edwards. And that's why, in addition to this page with these numbers, which I agree are important, we also, that introduction does such a good job of tying our priorities and our mission and our and what we're spending our money on. And it's really for people who have to force themselves to look at pages full of numbers in small type. It's easier to read the 2.5 pages introduction, which for the public is the introduction to the budget document.
Right.
Page 195.
That's it. Thank you.
Okay.
Other questions or comments? Well, I just want to add my final comment. Oh, no, and I know Director Riley has more comments. I just want to say how important transparency is. I know we all agree on that transparency is so important. It's the public's money, and we want it to be spent as wisely as possible, as productively as possible. And so we're holding ourselves to this high standard of transparency, and that's being recognized by these awards that the district has received for the accounting and transparency. And I thank our staff for that, Dave and Suresh. And it makes me proud to be part of this holding ourselves to these standards and being accountable to the public. So thanks to all of you. Director Riley?
Yeah, thank you. Since the Warriors have completed their process, we can go for another 2 hours on this budget. I just thought I'd add. No, Alvin stole a little bit of my thunder on page 209. I want to go there and I have two questions related to 209. It's more for clarification and so on. So just make sure you get on 209. There's a reference to a Cal-Am desal project. It's only 30,000 and it goes from 30 to 0. And I'm just wondering what was going on last year and what's not going to go on next year.
Yeah, and actually nothing happened last year.
For this year.
Or this current fiscal year, right. So the money did not get spent, but we have been carrying some amount, assuming either that we were going to participate. You may recall we had legislation passed years ago, probably 2013-14, to do a public financing to decrease the equity portion that was financed. Then Cal-Am managed to get itself onto the Safe Drinking Water State Revolving Fund list for state revolving fund loans. And we realized then that we would not have to develop the public financing. So we were originally carrying about $200,000 for bond counsel fees and underwriter and financial advisor fees to actually do the financing. Then we dropped that down to 30,000 on the outside chance that we would still have to participate, or we might, we hit a point, I believe it was the first year of Newsom, where the state revolving fund monies came under question. We were in COVID, receipts were down, and it wasn't clear. But then at the same time, the desal project got hung up at the Coastal Commission and it wasn't moving forward. So that question of will it be all public state revolving fund debt or would the district need to step in kind of went away, but we carried some money in there just for that process in case we had to call the attorneys or the underwriters. And this year, I think we've just said, well, it's not going to happen this fiscal year at all, so we don't need that money.
No, I appreciate that. And I remember that dynamic or that cycle of changes. And thanks for being reminded. Sometimes I just need to be reminded. The other item on that same page, there's a $750,000 down in the bottom quarter. It's for near-term production capacity. Can that be explained where it goes from seven? Well, I guess it's in the budget. No, I'm not sure. No.
Yeah, it probably goes from
zero. Thank you.
Yeah, it goes from 0 to 750 or whatever the numbers. I don't have it.
1,750,000.
Yeah, 1,750,000. And that's a placeholder to express our willingness to work with either Cal-Am or City of Seaside or both or Marina Coast Water District to develop additional production capacity in the General Jim Moore area. There's obviously ASR well number 1 as an issue. We might agree to cost share on a quickie replacement well. We've also talked about participating in a cost share in a well that would serve the Monterey Peninsula for a few years while waiting for the expansion to come online, and then would convert to a well to serve City of Seaside's municipal system and do a water transfer to Marina Coast Water District for the Campus Town project. The length of time it will take to actually discuss which of those may work could pass us by an entire fiscal year. But anyway, it's money in there to help resolve the ASR well number 1 problem, a failing Seaside Municipal well problem, and so forth. And there are some questions about, well, what should be our role if we don't retain long-term ownership? So it's a placeholder, and whatever proposal we come up with will come back to the board.
Okay.
Just through the chair, I appreciate that, because that's one of the items I told Seaside City Council about. So that's why I think this page is very valuable to show the public and make sure Director Elwood just not just talking. Thank you. Sorry, Director Rob.
No, you said it better than I did. No, those are my basic questions on just the budget for next year. Okay, I'm satisfied. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I have questions.
Please,
On
Director
the
Malik.
same page, I see obviously the water purchase.
Can you speak up, Safwat, please?
Yeah, I can. The water purchase, the PWM water purchase is escalating, including in 2024-2025 fiscal year, to 5 million more than what is expected this year. So that I assume that is following the program of the expansion and what they're doing. But then on the other hand, I see a lot of expenses this coming year and end up magically to zero in the following years. How can this be so accurately and surgically be terminated by the end of 2023? Take any of these items that show heavy expenditure or not so heavy expenditure in this coming year, and then end up being zero in the next following 2 years. Can you guarantee that we will not need to allocate any funds in 2023, 2024, and 24-25, such that we don't have to spend any money on these items?
Right. So you're on.
Still page 209.
Yeah, I'm in the HTML version, but it's the large projects.
Dave, I can screen share.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. It's the large projects and capital improvement plan.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the construction schedule for Pure Water Monterey expansion is such that, so just taking that one as an example, fourth item down. What will happen is and nothing's 100%, but we're highly confident that we're going to have a full offer from the WIFIA program, which is an EPA-based loan program. And so all the expenditures for Pure Water Monterey construction after a certain date will be from the proceeds of that borrowing. And so the district's share will go to zero. And we expect that the bid documents will be out on the street in August-ish timeframe, sign a water purchase agreement by September, which would then allow us to award. And we wouldn't award unless we got a final funding agreement in place. So sometime during this fiscal year, we'll have that loan. So the expenditures will continue, but they'll be paid for out of loan proceeds. So our piece of it goes to zero. That's one good example. The CalAm desal project, again, conceptually, we held 30,000 in for the possibility, but then, all indications, and it's tough to say who you should believe and when you should believe them, but in one communication with the water master, if there is a desalination plant, it's not coming online until 2030. So there will be very little activity of any kind in 23-24 or 24-25. So that was the reason for that. the Los Padres long-term plan. That effort is being wound down to the final technical memorandum right now as we speak. So some of these are just projects we know are done. Others are, as I said, they may be going on, but they're not our obligation from our budget. And so for a variety of different reasons.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Those are good questions and good answer. Other questions? Okay, then, is there a motion on this?
Should it be public
Public
comment?
comment, public comment.
Thank you. Please, let's see if there are members of the public that want to comment. Yeah.
Yes, as a reminder to our members of the public, if you wish to make public comment on item number 33, please raise your hand. Chair Paul, Sarah, can you share the timer? And at this time, I would like to invite Marley Melton. Marley, when you're ready, please present your comment.
I wanted to compliment all of you and express my appreciation for the transparency and thoroughness of the discussion. I grew up in a family that did some risky things. My father was a single-handed ocean sailor, and he always had backup plans for his backup plans and spares for his spares. And so I find it especially regrettable and worse that Cal-Am hasn't made any provision for additional extraction capacity. And considering the importance of the public water purchase to the budget and of the water itself to the whole community, I was very happy to see the contingency that you just mentioned about addressing the need for additional extraction capacity. But I think Cal-Am is kind of putting out there as though everything is somehow the water district's fault or M1 Water's fault. And I think your willingness to problem solve and the fact that the board is approving a budget to even help problem solve on this needs to be out there before the public, because I certainly appreciate what you are doing and the staff work and thought and care that has gone into this budget, and also to the problem solving approaches that you are so famous for taking successfully. So I hope you will somehow let the public know of all that has gone into and will continue to go into solving the extraction problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marley. Yes, we need to get better at letting the public know. Are there other members of the public who've raised their hands, Joel?
Chair Paul, I see no raised hand.
Okay, thank you. Now, if we can entertain a motion.
I make a
I move
motion.
approval of the budget.
He's first and I second.
Okay, so it's seconded by Director Malik, I think.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Roll call
Chair
vote.
Paul, who was the maker of the motion?
Director Riley.
Riley.
Good to go. Director Roberson?
Yep.
Director Anderson?
Yep.
Director Malik?
Yes, sir.
Director Riley?
Aye.
Director Edwards?
Yes.
Vice Chair Adams?
Aye.
Chair Paul?
Yes,
The motion carries on a vote of 7-0.
very
Thank you,
good.
directors.
Thanks again to Suraj and Dave for that, all the work that went into that. Good work. Okay, and item 34.
Yes, this is pretty straightforward. You may recall back in March that there were several changes made to committee meeting times, the committees themselves, and some of the committee charges. There were recommendations made This is the actual detail of what's required to enact all of those. The first was elimination of the Carmel River Advisory Committee because there's a bigger task force, Carmel River Task Force, that includes all of those original CRAC members, but then bigger set of stakeholders. There is the elimination of the Rules and Regs Committee, which has not met for 5 years, if not longer. There was the desire to rename the Administrative Committee to the Finance and Administration Committee due to the importance of finances and financial oversight. And then some additional changes to the attachments of and renumbering of the meeting rules. Then separately, the charge for the Ordinance 152 Oversight Panel was to reflect current practice for the scheduling of the annual report. We decided not to change the number of meetings per year. And then there's also a first reading of an ordinance, because part and parcel to the elimination of the Carmel River Advisory Committee is a modification of our rules, which defines the purpose and the structure of the advisory committee, and we can only modify our rules through ordinance. And so there is a first reading of ordinance number 191, which will then come back to you at the July board meeting. Or it may not, because I think we need to be out there 30 days. I'll clear that with council unless Fran wants to weigh in right now. But nevertheless, these are the activities that must go along with the recommendations from back in March. Most of the edits are redlined, or all the edits are redlined, so you can see what's being done to the meeting rules. And with that, our recommendation is that you adopt these changes as described above and in the exhibits, and to approve the first reading of Ordinance 191.
And just to confirm, Dave, we don't have 30 days between today's meeting and the July meeting, which is why second reading
Would have to be in August, yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Just off the top of my head, it wasn't going to make 30 days. Yeah, thank you, Fran.
I'm happy to make that motion.
To
approve the proposed productive, let's see, sorry, I've got my wrong piece of paper here. Okay. To adopt the changes to meeting rules described within the report and corresponding exhibits, and to approve the first reading of ordinance number 191.
Thank you.
Second.
I second.
Let's take it out to see if the public has any comments.
Sarah, can you share the timer? And at this time, I would like to invite Tom Rowley. Tom, when you're ready, please present your comment.
Good evening again, Tom Rowley. The continuation of the 4 meetings a year for the Ordinance 152 Committee, I think that was a wise move to not change that. That was what was set up at the beginning. And as you know, it wasn't mentioned tonight, but there is a lawsuit pending over the proceeds from a collection of Ordinance 152, the ordinance water supply charge. So thank you for including and keeping that ordinance in effect and having the report essentially as you've had it in the past. Thanks.
And I think what Tom also wanted to add was he admires a public agency who is actually eliminating some rules and regulations rather than layering new ones on. Right, Tom?
That's
Right.
right. Good. So often goes overlooked. Very good.
You better leave Tom Rowley alone, General Manager. He's been nice tonight.
My friend Tom is always nice.
Okay. Anybody else?
Paul, I see no raised hands.
Okay. Let's do a roll call vote, please.
Director Edwards?
Approval?
Director Riley?
Aye.
Director Malik?
Yes.
Director Anderson?
Yes.
Director Roberson?
Yes and amen.
Chair Adams,
Aye.
and Chair Paul.
Yes.
The motion carries on a vote of 7-0.
Thank you. The remaining items are informational items and staff reports. Are there any questions about those? If not, we will adjourn. And I thank all of you, the directors and staff and council, for your work
Thank you,
tonight.
everybody. Terrific.
Have a good week, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Thank you.
Night.
Bye.